So does Christopher Nkunku have a chance at redemption at Stamford Bridge? That's the big question today. Could we see a huge U-turn in the whole career of Nkunku at Stamford Bridge under Enzo Maresca? Is there reason to believe he actually is going to remain a Chelsea player by the end of this transfer window and somehow find his way back into the plans at Stamford Bridge? I know many of us anticipated and expected before the Club World Cup Nkunku's career at Chelsea was effectively done, and it was just biding time until he made his way out of it. But now, with what happened at the Club World Cup, with a piece that we're going to get into from Nazar Kinsella earlier this week, citing kind of a dilemma at Chelsea around Nkunku, is there a way back? So I want to hear your thoughts as ever in the comments below. We've actually got some responses to a question I posed on Twitter earlier about this. We'll go through some of the numbers and whether I think if in a scenario he would remain, is that even a good idea? So we'll jump into that. Please do like, subscribe. All of the likes help to go towards trying to find Jamie Carragher, because we're still struggling to locate him following Chelsea's Club World Cup victory. So please do hit the like button in support of that cause. But let's jump into it with Christopher Nkunku. Now, I think jumping all the way back to when he signed for Chelsea, I was really positive about Christopher Nkunku joining Chelsea. And it's such a sliding doors thing, right, with that injury that he got in his first season that effectively ruled him out of the entire 23-24 campaign and what could have been under Mauricio Pochettino following a really, really positive pre-season. And it felt like Pochettino had made Nkunku a huge part of his attack, and that was before the signing of Cole Palmer. And many people still think that the signing of Palmer kind of screwed up Nkunku's chances at Chelsea, because effectively he became the Nkunku. He became the kind of the free role kind of player who, you know, floated around a centre forward, took up a lot of the goals, became the dynamic kind of presence around Chelsea's attack that I think many of us anticipated Nkunku would be following the exit of Kai Havertz. But that really wasn't the case, obviously, with Palmer coming in. But then Nkunku gets back from injury, I think has a positive end to 23-24, again impresses in the previous pre-season, and we think maybe under Enzo Maresca he's going to find his way into the first team, but that isn't the case. He's effectively a B team player having to play Conference League minutes, and then by about January, February time it becomes quite clear he maybe doesn't have a future at the club at all, and he will be making way in the summer. And although gaining suddenly more minutes, especially at a centre forward position when Jackson got injured in the winter and kind of early spring, his performances were really, really poor, leading everyone to kind of feel, well, it's probably best if both parties go their separate ways. And then it became a major shock that not only was he included in the Club World Cup squad, but he played such a prevalent role. He came off the bench. He scored a huge goal against Benfica. He started in the semi-final against Fluminense. He didn't start the final, but he did come off the bench and he played a positive role. And Nazar Kinsella reporting for the BBC that internally, Nkunku has now won a lot of support because of what he did at the Club World Cup, although of course his future remains uncertain. Apparently he impressed staff internally as his contribution towards the Club World Cup title. He was brought off the bench before Nicholas Jackson in the final and earned 3 starts during the whole competition, including a goal of course against Benfica, which was huge in that very, very long game. Those appearances were earned according to Enzo Maresca during a tournament where the Italian also said Nkunku looked impressive in training. We do know there have been consistent talks about potential clubs still coming in for him, whether that be Bayern Munich, Manchester United, others as well. I think in the case of Man United, that seems unlikely at this point, given they're about to sign Brian Mbeumo. Bayern Munich for me has always kind of, or a return to the Bundesliga has kind of always felt like the strongest option for Nkunku. I do kind of feel like he's maybe a Timo Werner type player or other players who maybe just suits that league a lot more, and I could see him going there and flourishing again. But now we're in a situation where Noni Madueke has made his way to Arsenal. We're not entirely sure how Chelsea's response for the rest of the window is going to be. And you have to factor in how prevalent Nkunku was during a tournament where we saw the likes of Andre Santos, Liam Delap and Joao Pedro gain substantial minutes in the first team. So it wasn't purely a case of just trusting the players that Maresca had last season. And also the evolution of Maresca's formation that we talked about a lot during the tournament, where suddenly we're kind of playing inside forwards and Nkunku is Arguably, yes, maybe playing off the left, kind of a wider area than he'd like to be, but sometimes drifting inside to kind of an inside forward role, which absolutely more suits what he wants to do as a player. And you do kind of ponder with Chelsea continually going after these style of players, kind of players who were a bit more versatile, whether Nkunku will remain, whether Chelsea will look at a situation now when they gain money for other players. And you've got to factor in that even Nicholas Jackson, no matter my opinion on him leaving, may leave. I think if he leaves as well, then probably the chances of Nkunku staying surely increase, you would think. And just looking at his numbers from 24-25 aren't that impressive because he didn't get that many minutes. He only scored 3 goals. But this is not really to take down Pedro Neto, who I think is in a really good place at the moment with Chelsea. But that's only 1 less goal than Pedro Neto, who gained over 2,000 minutes compared to Nkunku's 911. In terms of a comparison between Cole Palmer and Nkunku, who, it's a fair comparison to make, kind of that inside forward player, someone who's going to gain a lot more freedom, kind of floating around rather than a natural kind of touchline hugging winger where we know other players will play for Maresca. Nkunku gets over 900 minutes, Palmer over 3,000. And again, it doesn't look terrible on this chart for Christopher Nkunku in terms of him being miles and miles and miles away from Cole Palmer, who of course is Chelsea's really genius and best player and most important player. This isn't trying to say that Nkunku should take the position of Cole Palmer, obviously not. It's just, looking at what the minutes we've been able to look at with Nkunku, they're not terrible. And arguably, I think for a lot of people have said, well, if you look at those minutes, he actually hasn't played in his most favourable position for a lot of that. He's been playing as a centre forward. He's been shifted out to a left wing position, which is not where he's best suited. I just wanted to gain sort of a feeling, a temperature of Chelsea fans on my Twitter account, where I just asked a simple question: a scenario, if Nkunku remains at Chelsea, what is your reaction? And I think this is a fair variation of sentiments around Nkunku at the moment, especially post the Club World Cup. Riley here says he's a good player who hasn't been played in his best position at Chelsea. If he's to stay, use him in his best role. If we aren't going to do that, then move him on. We've wasted 2 years of his prime. Not sure how more of the same helps the club or serves him. Will thrive in a good fit. Bad Rabbit says here, Jackson will probably have to leave for that, right? I like both, but Jackson is my preferred player. Craig here said, looked his best in the Club World Cup. Maresca seems to have adapted tactics to get more out of him. Definitely need depth for a Champions League run. 30 yards out also says here, would love it if we play him as a cam or left wing. OBX Blue, there's players I'm more concerned about leaving than Nkunku to BH. And JRB here says both parties need a fresh start. And another one kind of in a negative sense, Jay here says he has to go. He's not a good fit anymore. I feel like that's a fair judgment of probably the comments I'm going to get on this show as well about Nkunku and his future or lack of it at Chelsea, because I can understand kind of every view. I'm a fan of Nkunku's potential and what he could provide. I think he's a very explosive player. I think inside the box, he sometimes, in brief glimpses for Chelsea, has shown an ability to, especially in tight spaces, crowded spaces, with his technique, to be able to get himself into a position to take a shot and to score a goal, which some of our other attackers haven't been able to show that ability. Sometimes he's able to glide round. I think there's a nice versatility to him as well, although he isn't a classic number 9. I think when he has the freedom to kind of move around a centre forward and play off a potential focal point, I think he can also be quite devastating, especially with his speed in transition. So I like the potential of the player. I've always liked the talent of the player. And at 27, we can't really be talking about potential. We have to be talking about a prime player, someone who's going to be playing a lot of minutes. And then you get into, where does Nkunku feel about this? Like, if he's just going to be a squad player at his age, is that really a great place for him to be? For Chelsea, I think it's decent because you get to keep him and he's probably a good rotational option as a body for Enzo Maresca to use him. What is a season that I think is becoming increasingly clear needs a big squad, which is why I'm not a big fan of Chelsea just expensing with a load of their attackers at the moment, because I think it's better to keep what you have as best as possible, especially now Madueke's left. But I think for Nkunku, I do agree with people, if we're not going to use him in a role that best suits him, then you kind of ponder, well, get the money in, hopefully, for him from somewhere else, and then buy someone that you are actually going to use in a better capacity. And maybe it's just, too far gone at this point. Nkunku wants a fresh start. It hasn't worked at Chelsea. Maresca, sure, I'll use him for the time being, and it's a marriage of convenience for the Club World Cup. But post the Club World Cup, I'm going to be looking in alternative directions, because you've got to factor in Jamie Gittins is probably going to gain minutes for Chelsea. Other players too, not only from the Club World Cup who've impressed, like Joao Pedro, Liam Delap, But others like Pedro Neto, I think, you've got to factor in Esteval. And I know some people will go, well, they don't play in the same position, but I always think you've got to factor in the attackers because of the way Maresca uses them. And, where are those, in positions of the pitch, where is it going to be opened up? If you're assuming, as I think we all do, that Cole Palmer is going to play one of those positions, if João Pedro is going to play a centre forward role, where does Christopher Nkunku play? And I think most people at the moment would prefer to have Pedro Neto, per se, in the starting lineup than Christopher Nkunku, because of Neto's, I think, output and work rate we've seen has been really integral to Maresca. However, I think the evolution of his system has kind of hinted that Nkunku's profile better suits it than kind of the 4-3-3 really wide players that Maresca used in his first season that didn't suit Christopher Nkunku. There wasn't really a role for him, especially when Palmer was playing, and Palmer plays, of course, all the time because he's Cole Palmer. So I feel like that in itself is a huge question. I've seen links today to Xavi Simons from Leipzig, who obviously has done a lot of good work there. And we've heard the consistent links to Morgan Rogers, another kind of inside forward player, and others too, like Eberechi Eze, who you could see fill a role if Nkunku was to make way. But I do think Nkunku, I wonder, it would be a major shock. I have to say, I still would sit here and say it'd be a major shock to me if by the start of the Premier League season, maybe that's unfair because we've still got deadline and a lot of business can still happen late on, but if I was sat here in early September post that deadline and Nkunku's still a Chelsea player, I would be quite surprised. But I would be intrigued to see how it would work out, because I do think that would maybe be a signal that there's at least a compromise or an understanding of trying to make this work, because I do think Nkunku, as a prime level player who I think even in small glimpses for Chelsea and especially earlier in his career has proved he is a very, very impactful player. And I think in the right environment, Nkunku can explode. But has that environment ever been Chelsea, especially once Cole Palmer walked in? So I want to hear your thoughts about Christopher Nkunku. Am I being unfair to Nkunku? Am I going overboard by suggesting there's even a chance that Nkunku could still remain? Would you be happy for him to remain, even if he was a squad player, no matter what, the actual politics of it all is? Is that kind of a good rotational option for Maresca? Let me know down in the comments below, especially with that new system. We'll be back again soon. Please do keep bringing in your questions. If you haven't submitted them yet, you can email the show, sonofchelseaofficial@gmail.com, if you want to get your questions answered that way, or in the comments, just start them with the Q so I can pick them out and we'll add them to the Q&A. Ask questions about Chelsea, about football, all good stuff, and we'll record a big Q&A pretty soon, especially in the off season. So thank you for watching. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you again very, very soon. All the best.